How's it going, everybody? Uh, Wanted to do a deck profile real quick. There was a regional in oh my god, what's the name of the freaking place? Dandenong. Next level games Dandenong this weekend, and I didn't do amazingly. I ended up 2-3 on the day, but I did hard throw one of my games. I should not have been losable for me, which is fine. I mean, credit to my opponent; they found it out in a situation that should not have had one. But in my other two losses, I'll get into kind of the actual like recap of what my matches were and how they went. But I think this deck is in a good enough spot that I'm going to share it and then probably call it. Anybody that's seen the channel knows that I am the Earth, Wind, Storm guy. Like the last true pilot of this deck, and I don't think this deck is top tier at all. I think it's probably at like the bottom of tier two. But with two deck format coming around, there are like definitely reasons to consider a deck like this. I mean, you look at like the cards that it's using. The only staples are really the earth and the wind ones, so you can use like all your water staples or your Amaterasu in like a second deck. Uh, I don't know if this would be my second deck for any given event, um, but that is a big positive. And the deck did get a lot of really cool changes in the new set, and I think that because of those, I wanted to kind of revisit it, talk about the deck, and explain it. So if you haven't seen Retainer Storm before, Retainer Storm is built on kind of some incidental synergies between the Retainer package, the Opus 18 starter deck Noctis, and the Windstorm engine. As it turns out, the retainers are very good at generating cards in hand to cast and preventing you from dying, which are the things that Storm needs to really pop off. And the engine for Storm and like, the retainer engine is very small. It's just the three Noctises, two Gladios, two Promptos, one copy of Ignis, and two copies of Iris. Um, Something new to this set is the Ignis backup. This card's incredible in the deck. It turns out that having an extra, like a backup named Ignis, is perfect. It means that the Prompto now draws two cards a lot easier. Ignis has another burst for the deck. Noctis can now get a backup on a burst as opposed to a forward if you're just trying to build up backups after some early damage. The card's just really, really, really good, as it turns out. I had a game where Prompto drew me 8 cards with the Pot of Greed effect. And I won the game off of it. It was really cool. There's definitely some interesting concessions to the current meta, but with it being as aggro as it is, one of the best things you can do sometimes into something like, say, Chaos is just go Noctis, search a Gladio, drop the Gladio, kill the Chaos or like the Fujin or the Raijin, and then just kind of sit on it. And then they have to find removal for Noctis, or you can pop them again next turn with something like a Mat or a Prompto. It just makes a big difference in the power of the deck and its ability to stabilize against aggro. Mono Wind, for instance, if it's trying to stabilize, usually has to go for a very convoluted turn with, Lulus and Chocobos and Mist Dragons, or it has to have like a hard drawn Shinryu. The Noctis deck doesn't need that at all. If it sees just like two small forwards on the field, Noctis into Gladio answers them very well, and it's why I've really stuck with this build of the deck over any other variant of like a cast focused wind deck. I believe a lot of the other stuff that this is very similar to the list I played in North Carolina. We still have 3 copies of Tyro. Originally, this was to get access to Cloud, but I'm not running like the Golbez anymore. I think there's just enough good limit breaks now and good things to be doing that I don't need to run the one-of-brick Golbez. Not that the Golbez was ever really a bad card. Guaranteeing access to Iris, for instance, was always really nice. Nordstalin into Tilica. The Kolka that I used to run was switched out for the Tyro. Had to go down to 2 copies of Vieira. This card gets a lot better thanks to the printing of Luso. Just kind of it's another way to guarantee backup for the deck. It does lose a little bit of the long-term value that you would have with the forward Ignis. You could like play Ignis, crack something like a Nordstalin, and then you could, or like usually you would crack an Earth backup because the Earth back you don't want to over like flood on Earth. And then on a later turn, you can crack a Vieira, and then like both get a forward back in the break zone and draw a card, which just ends up being like really good value. But yeah, Stiltskin as an additional Northdahlin target next to Tilica. Tilica's in a really weird spot. She raises the ceiling of the deck so much, but she's really vulnerable right now. Cards like Une and Tidus really put a target on her head, and it's very difficult to protect her in this deck. There's no real negation or protection. So if Tilica ghosts, she just kind of isn't there. And one of the goals of any Tilica deck, I think, currently needs to be that the deck needs to do something without Tilica, which this deck does pretty well at. But the differences in games where you resolve Tilica and keep her on field versus the ones you don't are really, really crazy, wild. Especially like Tilica plus Iris in combination with the retainers. You can go Tilica, tap the Iris, play Prompto. Prompto activates the Iris. Prompto can search a Noctis on damage 3. You play the Noctis, tapping the Iris. Iris reactivates. Search a Gladio. You play the Gladio. Iris activates again. You end up with these really strong situations where off of just one Prompto, you have 1, 2, 3 casts and removal, and you're off to the races on just what everything else the deck wants to be doing, right? Like that, you now have procced your Rosa, so your Rosa activates all your backups again. You've probably drawn cards somewhere along the line, and you just have more things you can do. You can cast like a Leo, and keep going. Tyro is still in here for access to Leo and Cloud. Both these are just generally pretty nice. Sid Highwind is solid, but he is a little bit more expensive, and you're only getting a backup, which usually by the time you're trying to storm off, you don't really want backups. You want to be drawing random cards. Leo is better in that situation. And with Tilica, being able to just kind of go tap 2 backups, play the Leo, draw a card is really strong. So the other thing that's people are going to go here is the Cryol is gone, and the reason why is I'm on 2 copies of Matoya. Okay, well, what's Matoya doing here? Where's Shantotto? You have these off-color limit breaks. Turns out, the best card printed for Earthwind Storm since Noctis is the Shantotto in this set. This is an incredibly powerful card. Like, deceptively strong. She is effectively, like, 2 copies of Lulu at the same time. But she's better than Lulu because she can also steal from the opponent's break zone. Thanks to the Tyro in the deck, you can steal something like even Amaterasu to protect your stuff. If you're against an Earth deck, you can steal their Mist Dragon, which is really strong because they can't rip their own break zone with Mist Dragon. And if you're only doing your own thing, you can target, Azura and Chocobo, and she does both halves of the combo. You go Tilica, maybe you Evray back the backup. Cast a Shantotto. Azura your backups back. You go back to 5 active backups. The Chocobo's still there. Chocobo the Shantotto to hand. You draw a card. Ditch the card you draw. Play the Shantotto. Target Azura Chocobo. And you get to just loop it over and over again. You can generate 3 casts for every card remaining in your deck. Which is very strong, obviously. Oh, I did not mean to take one out. Yeah, there's 2 copies of her in the deck. This was 3 for a little bit, but I ran into issues that I swapped 1 card around for. I'll get to that in just a second. But because we're on 2 copies of Shantotto, we're only on 2 copies of Lulu as well. They perform pretty similar roles. If you wanted to pump your Earth numbers a bit more for stuff like the Shantotto Limit Break, or making sure you can cast stuff like your Noctis, you can bump your Shantottos to a 3rd copy, go down a copy of Lulu. However, that doesn't mean that we need a board wipe in our backups. And Matoya has actually really impressed me since I've started running this deck. I think this card might just be, like, underplayed in general. It turns out that, like, one of the annoying things about running Shantotto in your deck, especially a deck that needs to curve backups, is Shantotto is not usually the first or the second or like backup that you want to play. Like you want to play her like third, fourth, sometime around there. But a hand that has Matoya, if you're like looking at the matchup and saying, I need to curve backups and I don't need the board wipe effect, Matoya can just be a 2 CP backup for the deck, which is really, really powerful. One thing to note with this deck is you really only want 2 of Tilica, Matoya, and Ignis on the field. Once the second one's committed, you really don't want the third. You just need more win CP than that. It's like a weird thing. It's just like a way the ratios work out, where there's 32 win cards and 21 earth cards. And actually, the earth number has gone up over time, with the main goal of trying to make it possible to turn 1 cast a Mist Dragon or a Shantotto LB. Like, it just, if you need to, you really need to. And you just have a better chance of sculpting your hand for something like Knights or something like Chaos. Matoya, for instance, also needs a second Earth card in hand, so you have to have 3 Earth cards in your opener if you have to, say your opponent turn 1 Chaos, Fujin Raijin, and you need the Matoya right there. You need 3 Earth cards in hand. And Shantotto needs 4 Earth cards to do a turn 1 board wipe. So you need to know your matchups. There might be something to do a future video on. It's like the frustrating thing about aggro in this game, and it's true in a lot of games, is I think that it really rewards having friends and scouting in a way that I don't really like, partly due to the best of one nature of the format. But this is a deck that, knowing what your opponent's on, people call them top cut decks a lot as well, where it's in top cut you can change your game around based on what your opponent's doing. But it really is a strange thing where it's you do better when you know what your opponent's playing, because you just don't have time to respond sometimes. And having a higher earth count in the deck now allows you to have a better chance at the turn 1 Matoya or the Shantotto. And Shantotto forward makes this really possible. We were really struggling to run earth forwards in the deck last set. I ran Rydia in North Carolina just to Neo X Death, cards that are fine but don't necessarily further our game plan. Shantotto does kind of everything. The deck is very streamlined now as well. We're not doing a lot of extra stuff. Storm Engine, the one Every, the one Tomos, 2 Rosa, 2 Lulu, 2 Luso. Shantotto also kind of falls under that. I don't like the number of 2 ofs in the deck. It feels like some of these can or should be at 3, but the summons and the backups being at higher quantities is just so much more important. And with the 3 copies of Kusith, the Shantottos, the Lulus, it's not difficult to recover these cards if you need to discard them early for a board wipe or to get a backup into play. And yeah, I've been on 3 Roses before. I've been on 3 Shantottos. All that makes sense. I'll get to this in a second, but let's go over summons. Only 2 copies of Azura. It's really good with Shantotto, but because we're not on 2 CP Zidane, our backups to recover are so much more limited. We have just the Luso, the Prompto, and the Iris, meaning the recursion mode just isn't as good. It really is just an extra enabler in the same way that something like Alexander is. In that situation, you don't need 3 copies of the card. Alexander, similarly, just a great card for good. You go Shantotto with Azura and Alexander. Azura back to backups. Alexander draw 2, and try to keep going from there. The 3 copies of Chocobo. This card, I think it's a lot less powerful in this deck. A lot of the entry effects just are less strong than they would be. We're not looping things like Zidane. The self-protection is really nice. It makes it very hard to remove your board, but sometimes we need to be having blockers. But the real value is you can remove one with a Shantotto and then put the Shantotto back in hand, but Shantotto still gets you an extra summon every time you do that. So you can go just for example, you can go off 5 backups, play the Shantotto, remove Chocobo and a Kusith. and then they go to do something, you block the Shantotto, you Chocobo it to hand, you get to do it next turn, but you still plus to the Kusith, like, permanently. 3 copies of Kusith, just kind of a good Storm Enabler, it's a good EX Burst, just kind of does a little bit of everything. 1 copy of Dryad, I would love to bump this to 2 copies, but there's really just not room for it. And it's a little awkward. Without Lulu on field, sometimes you just don't get to 5 Earth characters for that kind of magic 10k kill spell. And card's very good, like especially at like 1 copy, but it doesn't make sense to run multiples of it. 3 copies of Mist Dragon is just kind of mandatory in the current format. Everything is touching the break zone, and this gives you game against Hythlodaeus, Knights, and Chaos in a way there wouldn't normally be. And like in a pinch, you can also just remove the break zone as an extra cast. You can protect your Rosa from an Amaterasu. 1 copy of Alexander. This is a great way to deal with cards like Une. Monsters are very, very strong. You can kind of go Alexander plus Chocobo with Shantotto. Go like Shantotto and then play like, I don't know, a Rosa. And then go Alexander, pop the thing, Chocobo the Shantotto to hand, and kind of keep doing that and keep popping monsters over and over again for a little bit. Which is obviously quite good. Just a great utility summon when it's good. It's really strong. And then lastly, 1 copy of Hecaton Shear. I was kind of noticing that the deck can really struggle with mono Earth. And I was trying to dig and think, well, I could go up a copy of Dryad, that would help quite a bit. But one of the big issues with playing against mono Earth in particular is cards like Nova Synthesis. The Leo Warrior of Light combo. And being able to loop Hecaton Shear with Shantotto, you go Shantotto, Hecaton Shear, and Chocobo, allows you to really effectively prevent them from getting to that late game scaling condition. It's an interruption if your opponent goes for the Leo Warrior of Light Tidus thing. You can break it back up in response. Now they don't have 8 characters. Really good in other control matchups. And this deck was struggling against other control decks. The ceiling of this deck, it's very strange to say this for a win cast deck, but the ceiling is very low on this deck compared to what you might be used to. One of the biggest reasons why is the last card. We went back to 3 CPs a day. And I will say I absolutely missed 2 CPs a day in all of my testing. The card having 1 less thing to recur with Azura, 1 less really good cast for 1 CP, the ability to steal really powerful summons and forwards, all really hurts. But there's no other card in the deck that can stop like the Hythlodaeus combo decks. And the goal of Zidane in this deck is if you're against an aggro deck or a Hythlodaeus combo deck or anything like that, sometimes Zidane can make them brick enough to where you can get to your late game. And your deck should be more efficient than theirs is, even with the 3 CP hit off of Zidane. And, I mean, Zidane, looping Zidane is very powerful. It's never been a bad card. But it doesn't feed the engine the way that you really used to be able to in these Storm decks with the Opus 16 Zidane. Stealing cards like Warrior of Light, for instance, or Amaterasu, it's so strong in control mirrors. It's why Wind has been the dominant way of dealing with control decks for so long, is because it's the control deck that beats other control decks. And this Zidane can do an approximation of that because they can't protect cards in hand. If you play this, is your opponent going to Amaterasu Zidane? Like, no. So you're going to be able to go through Amaterasu. Cards like Cucullin, that could be a problem for Rosa, for instance. All that is really strong, but there is the downside of this card does not generate casts in the same way that the 2CP Zidane does. Similarly, there's no haste in the deck, so actually closing games into a larger number of board wipes can be difficult. For the limit breaks, pretty standard set. 2 copies of Leo. These are just good ways of helping generate casts. We need like a cheap thing we can do. Leo is a great way of handling that. 1 copy of Shantotto. You have to be able to Shantotto in some matchups. And This deck is more capable of doing that than any previous Earthwind deck that I had built before. One copy of Matt. This is a weird one. Turns out that having more fodder in those aggro matchups for Noctis, you can just kind of go Noctis, Gladio, next turn ditch an Earth card and anything else, play Matt. It's a second 9k punch, and also, like, it's another cheap cast that can be removal with a Noctis on field. It matters a lot more than you think it does. And the card has extra ramifications in this deck exactly, which is why it's in here. One copy of Cloud, just great removal, very cheap with Tyro. This deck doesn't have any outright breaks. This is another way of dealing with a card like Iridia or something that like doesn't take damage. Or like a Porum that could be a problem for Rosa, for instance. One copy of Sid Highwind. I love this card, even though he really doesn't do that much. He whiffs a lot more than you would think with 15 cards in the deck. But he does do what he says on the tin, and he doesn't need to do more, honestly. I love this card for what it is. Luso gets us extra access to our Vieras. Again, you need to get those backups down when you have the cast deck. Luso's a great way of making sure that happens. If you go like Tilica, you can then go like 2 for Luso, 2 for the Viera, and kind of go off from there, basically. One copy of Noctis. He comes up, in particular, if like all of your Kusiths are gone. In a pinch, you can give this Prompto haste as well. Like if you need to like close the game, but 60p is very expensive for an effect like this. So you kind of have to time it well. Similarly, it does also activate Iris, which is cool. Do not forget that Iris doesn't activate on just these guys. It also activates off of the Noctis here. Some other cards that I considered. One copy of Surges could be good if you need to push for lethal through something, but I mean, it's wind. It shouldn't have issues with pushing for lethal. That's not what happened at the regional, but we'll get to that in a second. Zach is similarly a very cheap cast that can give some extra reach. Nyx, if your opponent like Amaterasu's on Noctis and you have a Tyro, you can tap the Tyro, play Nyx for 1. It can be a very good way of helping to kind of continue to generate casts. You can also like crash a Prompto and then tap the Tyro to play the Nyx. It's not bad, it's just not great. Death Gaze, there's just no target that Death Gaze really hits in the meta that I care about. Like, the worst knight to kill on a knight's board is Karilla. You just do not care about killing Karilla at all most of the time. It's almost actively bad to kill Karilla, I would say. If they either draw another one or they draw a Ramza, so I don't see a target for. I mean, I guess it kills Tyvis would be nice, but again, like Tyvis has already done his thing. He's already entered and searched the Axstar or the Mog and played the Mog. Like, does Death Gaze really matter at that point? Like, pace. You basically you paid for their Tyvis at that point to undo it. I'm just not a fan of the card. Ace, similarly, we don't get very high on win count. So if we need to do a board clear, you can just focus on Luso or the Matoya or the Shantotto. Ace doesn't really add anything that the other cards in the deck aren't already doing. What are the other things? Ico, I didn't have an expense. I have a lot of summons in the deck, which is great, but I didn't want to run like a. Again, I'm going to use the Yu-Gi-Oh! Term of a Garnet, which is a card that you don't want to draw, but don't want to actually, or you don't want to draw because it's live in the deck and dead in the hand. There just isn't one of those that I was comfortable playing. One copy of Fat Chocobo would be okay if you wanted to run that, but I think the Limit Break deck is tight enough and strong enough as is to not need that. Leela is something to consider. This deck can have a Sid Randell weakness. In fact, the only outs to Sid Randell are the one copy of Dryad and the Matoya. But my issue with Sid Randell is like Ice is so good at protecting the Sid Randell from exactly Leela that she didn't really make sense for the deck. You could put her in over the Noctis, though. I wouldn't hate that, or over one of the Leos. Are there any other limit breaks that people would ask about? Luna Freya in this deck is probably just worse than Leo. There's not enough EX burst to really care. And again, you can only do it off of having a Tyro in play anyway, at which point you should be developed enough where 2 CP for a cast is better than 4 CP, or than 5 CP to dig a little bit and try to find a specific combo piece. You would have the same issue with her that you have with Noctis, which is it's very hard to Luna Freya and combo in the same turn. Yeah, Victoria you could replace over the Cloud if you are in a 2-deck format. They do the same thing for the most part of kill a small thing for cheap. Cloud is just more unconditional, which is nice. But it is nice that this deck has a Dane defeat into that. Kuja you could run as well for the same reasons like a Surges. It's like a defensive card that like also can be used offensively. I'm trying to think if there's any other like really like interesting limit breaks. None of them are coming to mind. As for the tournament, I got a bye round 1. Just I was the random lucky winner of a bye. My first round, I sit down. My opponent, does their turn 1 play, and she passes, and I go, okay, Norstala search Tilica, and she picks up Tilica and goes, "What the heck is this card?" Which I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm playing some War Crimes today. I opened crazy that game, easily pushed my way through. The deck did exactly what it was supposed to do, and Zidane came in real handy. I got to rip out like some Rydias in hand. It was a 4-color Rydia control deck, and Zidane's really good into matchups like that. Because again, like the Amaterasu and everything else don't feel as good if the Zidane's around to rip them, or it's very hard to set up the Rydia Rosa Cecil line if they can't protect cards in hand. So Zidane actually was very good in that match. The second round or third round, I sit down. I know my opponent's on the Hythlodaeus combo deck. I open my first hand. It's fantastic. I have to mulligan because it doesn't do anything against Hythlodaeus combo. I had I think it was Vieira plus Atomos with a Kusith. It's a great hand. However, I had no cards that interact with the Hythlodaeus combo. I didn't have enough Earth cards for a Shantotto LB. I have to mulligan that away. I mulligan. Hand is not better. I don't draw. I go from 1 Earth cards to no Earth cards in hand. Or no, I think I had 1 Earth card again in hand. I wanted to see a Mist Dragon, like a Mist Dragon with another summon. You can cut off the Regis and the Minfilia. The goal of this deck is either to Zidane rip out the Hythlodaeus, or hope that when they spin the Hythlo, you can go cast one of your cheap summons, get it negated by the Cleone, and then Mist Dragon the Break Zone, and then maybe they traded 4 things on field for 4 things on field. They get a Cindy and a Minfilia, or hopefully not Cindy because Cindy searches, but a Vanille, a Minfilia, a Regis, and then maybe a Haste Goblin, right? If they trade even and you trade even, you come out ahead probably. That's the general goal against the deck. Never saw Mist Dragon, never saw Zidane, and at no point did I have enough Earth cards with Shantotto LB. He actually whiffed the OTK. It did not get to the point where the OTK was going to happen. I didn't draw enough Earth cards for the Shantotto LB, which would have probably won me the game on the spot. And I was 1 card in hand away from being able to lose those 7, which would have wiped the field and kind of given me some time to maybe survive. But all of that was just a little bit too much. So I lost that one. Round 4 was against the winner, or the person that ended up going on to win the regional. He was on a Earth, Water, Siren control deck. And I lost all the die rolls on the day as well. I did not win a single die roll the entire tournament, which is right where you want to be. But he goes turn 1, Rydia for Yuna, and backup breaking Heka. And I go, oh gosh, that's really annoying. I don't want to deal with backup breaking Heka. Tilica isn't safe. You see the Tilica, and then you have Hecatoncheer. It's the easiest thing you're going to kill ever. I open Vieira. Vieira finds another Vieira. I play the Vieira. I then go for a Zidane and rip this Heka. And that Heka was the biggest nuisance for him. Earth, Water control, lots of backups. I broke 5 of them with his Hecatoncheer over the course of the game. Just was completely ruthless with it. And like, I really should have won the game. There really wasn't a way that I shouldn't have. And we get down to the point he has one backup because he had to Neo X Death to try to stabilize as best he can. I've been breaking backups the entire game, and he top decks and plays a Galuf. And I panic a little bit. I go, oh shoot, I don't have a way to outright break the Galuf or get him out of the way to push for lethal. And all I have to do is, get through with my big board of like 5 forwards. But this Galuf now has 40 cards in the break zone, or 30 cards in the break zone, and I didn't rip the break zone the whole game because I wanted access to his Hecaton Shear. I guess I could have like removed the Hecaton Shear with my Shantotto and then Mist Dragon, but I never needed to do that, right? And I panic a bit, and I go, well, he's got a Lev 6. I'll target the Lev 6 with my next Shantotto, and he goes, Galuf, remove the Lev 6. And I go, oh, I am in a world of hurt. And it wasn't over there, but he top decked Cancel Leviathan and a Mist Dragon of his own. And all my Mist Dragons were gone. All my Kusiths were gone. I had no ways of dealing with this Galuf anymore, other than to try to punch over a Galuf on damage 3 with 30 cards in the break zone. And I decked out. Legitimately a game that I never should have lost. All I needed to do was on that first Shantotto, target my own Mist Dragon, and Mist Dragon his break zone, let him make the Galuf really big for a turn, and then he was dead. And like, there was no world I was ever going to lose if I did that. But I didn't. I made the only mistake that lost me that game, unfortunately. And to my opponent's credit, they found the line that gave him the win. But that was the game that I wish I had back, honestly. That's fine, though. I still have it winning in. I go down, I sit down, I lose the die roll. My opponent goes Tyvis for Mog. He knew I was on a win deck and knew that he needed to both push damage and cut me off of searching with more Stalin. He did both. My opening was incredibly bad. I opened like double Iris, double Alexander, or like double Azura. Again, no Earth cards. I at no point in the game could I Shantotto LB. And it was a Mono Fire Megissa deck that he just opened Tyvis and went, yeah. Did Tyvis Mog. I go for a Luso to try to get a Vieira, which you can make an argument I should have gone for Sid instead, but I figured if he cracked the Mog, like the Luso kind of delete, like Luso being 5 CP, delete this Mog off the field, and like, I wasn't doing anything with extra with the 1 CP anyway that turn. Seemed good enough to go for. I stick a Noctis Gladio at one point, but the one unfortunate thing is that like Mono Fire has so many ways to get a Noctis off the field. I got him onto the field like 3 times, and every single time he was deleted within 2 turns, and I just ran out of gas because I didn't draw backups, I had no time to play them, and my opponent eventually gets me to 6 damage. I had a big board, and then he goes Megissa, Ifrit, target Megissa, play Stola, and the game was over. And so yeah, I was 2-3, but like looking back at the games I lost, like getting run down by Mono Fire, Megissa after losing the die roll, like that's gonna be a rough matchup in general for this deck, I feel like. Losing to Hythlodaeus combo when I'm not able to do the exact thing I'm tech to do for that matchup. That happens. Like I said, it was just the one game against the Earth Water player that cost me a chance at the top cut of the regional. As far as the deck itself, I think it's really fun. It's really cool. It's really, it is clearly good enough. I think it's hard to play. I would probably say that I don't think this is better than Mono Earth or Refia if you're a control pilot. But I do think if you want to play a win cast deck, this is probably what it needs to look like to survive in the current format. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Let me know if there's any changes that you would make to this deck. One other thing that is nice, it's not very expensive. Materia Hunter has it priced at about $90. Because none of the limit breaks are expensive, we're not running cards like 4-color Warrior of Light. It really is just like the Rosa. I think is like the Rosas and the Lulus are like the only cards that really cost much of anything. Norstalin and Tilika are not expensive. None of the limit breaks are expensive. I think Cloud's like $2. Tomos is like $5, but like, oh, the Chocobo summons are the Chocobo summons got reprinted even. So yeah, like none of the cards in this are like super expensive or hard to get a hold of. Um, so yeah, I definitely recommend giving it a shot and playing. It's a lot of fun, and let me know what you all think. Yeah, thanks for watching.